Welcome to Asia Pacific Defence Reporter, your go-to source for cutting-edge security insights in the region. Get ready for rapid-fire analysis and commentary from the Asia Pacific with your host, Kim Bergman.
Hello and welcome back. This is podcast number 100. So a big thank you to everyone who is listening. I'm very flattered. These things started off as an experiment, but it seems that there is a niche out there for a lot more information about what is happening in the defence and national security space. And I hope these episodes aren't too repetitive, but there are some big recurrent themes that are too important to ignore, such as AUKUS, the details of which are still largely being ignored by big sections of the media. There are gaps everywhere. For example, when I watched the recent Four Corners report, I'm assuming many others would have also viewed it, looking at the chances of Australia getting nuclear-powered submarines, it was actually not bad, since it contrasted some people saying we would and others with equally convincing arguments saying that no, we won't receive any. And what I noticed in what was otherwise a well-researched program was that it did not mention once, not a single time, that the deal is so bad that the first two proposed Virginia-class submarines will be second-hand, with already 15 years of their life gone, meaning that they will be more difficult and more expensive to maintain, and since we have committed to the total lunacy of disposing of them on Australian soil, we should have started planning for that 15 years ago, and it hasn't even begun. Anyway, I thought I should choose some sort of theme for the 100th podcast, and let's make it about Ukraine, because that's bringing together several very important themes, including, but not limited to, the trustworthiness of the US as an ally, and on top of that, the very future of military technology. That's not to ignore Iran or the ongoing conflict in Gaza, and let me say to my Jewish friends that bombing seafront cafes used by journalists, the few of them that remain alive in that part of the world, and shooting dead hundreds of desperate people queuing for food is not warfare, and the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip is not good policy either. But back to Ukraine, and just a few days ago, the US again suspended military aid, or at least some of it, and everyone is scratching their heads trying to figure out exactly what is going on. Once again, Vladimir Putin will be delighted with any reduction in the supply of air defense missiles, because that will allow his drone swarms to hit more civilian targets. And there's an Australian angle, sort of, in all of this. The bureaucrat believed to be responsible for the pause, done for the already discredited reason that some US stockpiles are running low, is Mr. Elbridge Colby, well known to people who study the defence space. Earlier this year, before it became fashionable to do so, he told an Australian conference that we needed to lift defence expenditure to 3% of GDP. He's also the person undertaking the 30-day review into AUKUS, which will be completed about 10 days from now. As I've said before, I suspect that the review will find a way to continue moving AUKUS forward, probably in a way that bleeds even more money from Australia. After all, Australian policymakers and the top ranks of the RAN have made it abundantly clear that when the US says jump, we ask how high. And of course, it isn't their personal money at stake, it's coming from Australian taxpayers. Which reminds me, those two second-hand Virginia submarines, they aren't being given to Australia. They will be sold to us at, I think, about $3 billion each. That's 4.7 billion Australian at today's exchange rate. So we're not getting any financial or commercial favours in any of this. And keep in mind a couple of factors here. Ukraine has bipartisan support in US Congress, just like Australia does. And a few weeks ago, Ukraine signed a critical minerals deal with the US, just like our political grovellers are planning to do. And neither factor seems to have made the slightest difference when it came to the US halting the supply of weapons. Australians, you really need to take note of what's going on. Now, just very briefly, another matter that I will be going on to in a lot of detail in the future. I sort of got a few brief headlines. Our landing helicopter docks, the 2 Canberra-class ships. The ANAO had a look into their support and has come up with yet another damning report. I'll just pluck a couple of sentences out of the executive summary. Here we go, quote, "Defence did not implement fit-for-purpose planning and value-for-money procurement arrangements to support LHD sustainment. Defence's future sustainment requirements, including access to important intellectual property for the LHDs, were not sufficiently developed during the acquisition phase." There are dozens of similar paragraphs throughout this report. It's not hyperbolic to say that this is some sort of disaster. It's affecting the availability and reliability of ships and is presumably costing taxpayers a fortune on top of that. So we're paying more money for things that don't work as well as they should. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If the department was open up to a far greater level of scrutiny, there would be an automatic and almost immediate lift in performance. Now, it can be done easily and at zero cost. Nothing, not an extra cent. All that needs to happen is for the Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles to instruct the Defence Minister to send a memo to the department. Remind me, who's the Defence Minister? Oh, that's right. It's also Richard Marles. So he can order himself to write in the following terms to the Secretary and the CDF. And now I've taken the trouble of writing this down, and I can send a copy to his office so that he doesn't have to. Dear Secretary and CDF, as you would be aware, this government is committed to openness and transparency. And I'll just say, presumably anyone reading this would pause for 30 seconds of laughter. But my proposed letter continues. It is also our belief that the process of government is improved by external scrutiny and review of major decisions, and this is particularly true in the case of defence, which has a dismal record of project delivery stretching back for more than 20 years. Accordingly, the two of you, either together or separately, will make yourselves available for a media roundtable at least once a year. This can be done on background. I'll explain that. Ministers don't like defence bureaucrats stealing the limelight. A background briefing means that journalists can use the information, but we can't attribute it to a person or persons, so ministers can keep all of the limelight to themselves. Anyway, these annual briefings should be no less than 2 hours in length. This instruction also applies to all service chiefs and the heads of cyber and space commands. It is vital that the procurement areas of defence become far more transparent, and the heads of areas such as GWIO, CASG, and naval shipbuilding will likewise make themselves regularly available for media briefings. Finally, questions from journalists need to be answered in a timely and detailed manner. The current practice of either ignoring media inquiries or supplying a one-sentence response to a list of detailed questions is no longer acceptable. Yours sincerely, Richard Marles, in my capacity as the Defence Minister of Australia. The whole thing, there you go, that would go a long way to addressing these profound problems, because it's just like surveillance cameras in public areas. Some people might not like them, but they reduce crime. It's the same thing with program managers. If they are under regular scrutiny, they will be far less likely to do stupid things, like destroy an entire fleet of 46 Taipan helicopters or give huge amounts of cash to US defense companies with no refund clause. I mean, there are so many examples, and I keep on bringing them up in just about every podcast. But a good current one is C3000, because I'm in the process of writing a detailed article about the ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems bid. The department is so secretive, and the process is so badly flawed. When you go to the departmental website and go to the search engine and enter C3000, see what comes up. All you get is a transcript, one single document of a group chat in Perth at a conference last June or July, involving 4 heads of navies, Australia, UK, US and Japan, and C-3000 gets a passing mention. That's it. It's just totally ridiculous. It has to stop. Next, and I've also touched on this, restructure the department in a way as to bring back genuine internal contestability. I'll elaborate on that in a future occasion. But let's pivot back to Ukraine and the future of warfare. But before that, I'll again remind people why the defeat of Russia, and that's what it's going to take. Vladimir Putin has said that his war aims have not changed. He's talking about the complete conquest of Ukraine. Why does this matter to Australia? Well, in a general sense, will Australia's security be improved by a greatly weakened Russia? Well, of course it will. Russia will no longer be in a position to stir up troubles, say, with air bases in Indonesia. Similarly, will Australia's security be improved if China is deterred from aggression? You bet, absolutely it will be. This is the single biggest issue, rather obviously, for US defence planners. Not only is China's military massive, but in some areas I suspect it might also have a qualitative edge over the West. I'm thinking of hypersonics, quantum computing, and possibly also hardware such as air-to-air missiles, if reporting from the recent stoush between India and Pakistan is anything to go by. Sorting fact from fiction is often difficult in wartime, but it seems that the Chinese made PL-15 beyond visual range missiles that the Pakistani Air Force uses shot down a number of advanced Indian combat aircraft. And if true, this would add another layer of worry for defence planners. Now, China is a major supplier of dual-use components and know-how to Russia's defence industry. This is officially denied, but there's zero doubt, that Chinese companies are supplying hardware, navigation systems, control systems, communication technology, all of that sort of stuff, and that flow is increasing, not decreasing. So every time you see television pictures of a hospital or a school in Ukraine in flames, that's partly thanks to the policies of Beijing. The overall picture is even murkier because Chinese officials have stated and then denied saying that China will not allow Russia to be defeated. And on that theme, would it be a good thing or a bad thing for North Korea to be deterred from aggression? Well, again, obviously a good thing, because if the North attacked the Republic of Korea, South Korea, or Japan, or both, it's easy to see how Australia could quickly become involved. And frankly, the only way to get that lesson through to North Korea seems to be if Ukraine continues inflicting huge losses on the forces that have been sent to fight alongside their Russian buddies. Which takes me to the next important theme. How is Ukraine managing to inflict such disproportionate losses? One word: drones. History is full of delusional thinking about military technology, and I have a couple of favourites. In the 18th century, a Scottish investor demonstrated a revolver-style machine gun to the heads of the British Army, and the best and brightest minds of the day rejected the idea on the basis that such a device would consume the supply of ammunition too quickly. But for me, the best of all, again involving the British, coincidentally, because all military organisations have made howlers, was the use of cavalry, or the non-use, during the First World War, or more specifically, cavalry on the Western Front. You'd have applications in other theatres. Now, this is a little-known fact that between 1914 and 1918, in the 4 years of brutal conflict, more British shipping was tied up delivering horse food to France than was used delivering ammunition and weapons. Isn't that amazing? Now, as anyone who has ever had the misfortune of owning a horse knows, they eat a lot. If they don't eat, they lose energy and become even more useless than in a fully fed state. But military thinkers and their political leaders were so delusional that for 4 years British cavalry divisions were scattered around the north of France waiting for the big breakthrough, which of course never came. The French were just as bad. That's why so much fodder had to come from the UK, because the French could barely feed all of their own cavalry horses. I think we are at a similar point in military history, and if our planners continue to ignore drone warfare, they are the equivalent of putting all of the country's limited resources into the modern-day equivalent of horse feed. Some Australian units are starting to receive drones. Almost exactly a year ago, with a lot of fanfare, the government announced that we would receive 300 Switchblade kamikaze drones. Good. Study them, pull them apart, and reverse engineer them. Now, guess how many tactical quadcopter-type drones Ukraine uses every day? Between 10,000 and 20,000 per day. Fighting in Ukraine is now a sort of First World War affair. Maneuver warfare, which has dominated since 1939, is dead, and no one knows if technology will evolve to allow some sort of renaissance. The 49 Abrams M1A1s, main battle tanks Australia has donated, will stay in a big shed somewhere near Lviv until someone figures out a smart way to use them, because at the moment they would last 5 minutes if deployed within 10 kilometres of the front lines. The $3 billion worth of M1A2s we are buying to replace them, along with heavy engineering vehicles, are also close to useless. You know those 29 Apache attack helicopters? We are spending $7 billion to replace 22 perfectly good Tiger armed reconnaissance helicopters. Apaches have been phased out by Japan, and South Korea looks like going the same way, and guess why? Armed drones can perform missions more effectively at many orders of magnitude lower cost, and the lives of aircrew are not part of the equation, and best of all, they can be built locally because you don't need a huge industrial base to produce them. At the same time, Australia needs to do more to help Ukraine for the reasons I've mentioned, but we also need to be supplying appropriate technologies. One of the best things we could do is send money so Ukraine can build more of their own weapons, and we, that is the ADF, should be doing as much as possible to learn from the experience. And we, all Australians, or at least Australians driving a petrol-powered car or using a brush cutter burning two-stroke, we should stop helping Russia, because all of the fuel that we put in our machines has a component of Russian petrol in it. It turns out that the international oil trade is, it's truly international big business. Australia has no refining capacity left. That's all been shut down. So our petrol is imported from places like Singapore, and for this particular example, from India. And it's a well-known documented fact that something like 5% of the petrol sold in Australia is actually Russian fuel. Now, as individuals, we can't go and remove that from the stuff that we're putting in our tank, but we could expect our government to crack down on that and to introduce financial sanctions for any of the retailers who are mixing their fuel sold here with supplies from Russia. Do you know that the amount of money that Australia is transferring to Russia through the sale of petrol every year is greater than the total of all of the military aid that we've extended? Now, also recently, Richard Marles made some sort of offhand comment that aid for Ukraine is rightly part of the defence budget. Well, why? Why do people get away with just these ridiculous assertions? Run it out of Prime Minister and Cabinet, allocate it a separate budget, get someone to coordinate what is going on. All right, this is the end of the 100th episode. Hopefully I'll get to 200 over the next couple of years. Thank you as always for listening. Goodbye for now, and see you next time.
That's today's Asia Pacific Defence Reporter. For more in-depth articles, expert opinions and exclusive interviews, visit AsiaPacificDefenceReporter.com. Stay informed, stay ahead. This is your source for all things defence. Until next time.